is you have to come to America, assimilate into American culture, work hard, take America as your own country, leave your prior country behind. That's what it means.
Can I just say part of it. Can I just say that's flat out wrong? And that's utter BS. First of all,
it's what the oath
there is
says
a difference. There is a difference between coming to this country and absorbing all of the greatness of this country and the opportunity of this country and maintaining the values that you bring with you, maintaining the dignity that you bring with you. Black folk were stripped of absolutely everything. But all we had was hope and faith. We didn't come here to assimilate. We were brought here in chains. There was no assimilation. So let's get that absolutely correct.
In today's video, Bakari Sellers and Abby Phillip go off on Brad Todd on CNN's Newsnight, with Abby Phillip as a fiery primetime clash erupts over immigration, assimilation, and racially charged political rhetoric. Bakari Sellers and Abby Phillip push back with sharp facts on enforcement realities, economic consequences, and the impact of divisive messaging, putting Brad Todd directly on the defensive in a tense exchange. So let's dive in and watch how Bakari Sellers and Abby Phillip shut down Brad Todd on CNN's Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
And there also is a line between talking about immigration and being outwardly racist. And what we're doing here is we're kind of beating around the bush, because what Donald Trump does with Somalians is utter racism. And if he did it one time, then we can excuse it. But he called these people filthy. He called them animals. He said all they do, and we get into this thing where we say now that we have to become westernized, that you have to come here and assimilate. No. You say that you want Norwegians. You say you want white South Africans. You call African countries shithole countries. You poo-poo on Haiti. Like, let's be extremely clear about what we're talking about in this administration. And I think that there is a refreshing, people finally, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when racists were like in the closet, but now, you know, it's out. And I'm okay with that. I know what I'm dealing with. So,
I'm not.
But also, if there was an assimilation, it wouldn't be to Western culture. It would be to Native American culture, because y'all are visitors too here, if we want to be clear. But we don't talk about that. We erase them. We put them on reservations. We try and give them tribal sovereignty. And and their community also was decimated by people who came and tried to get them to assimilate. It wasn't just that we were stripped from everything. If we wanted as Black people to keep our culture, we were killed, we were lynched, we were beaten, our families were torn apart. Does that do any of those things ring true to sound like some things that might be happening now? People are being killed, families are being torn apart. There is the beauty of America used to be as a melting pot.
Correct.
It used to be the thing where
That's
diversity.
what assimilation is. It's a melting pot.
No, assimilation and a melting pot are not the same thing.
In 1988,
No, it's
Jesse
not.
Jackson told you what America
No, it
was.
was.
No. You want America to be this carpet. It's not. It's a quilt. Jesse Jackson literally told you what America was. It's a quilt. It's different patches that are sewn together to make a unique fabric.
Yes.
Like this is what his life was. That is, I mean, like, I don't understand how we don't understand history.
Well, look, I just to bring this back to why we're even talking about this, I think the question of what is the correct vision of this country is really part of what is up for grabs right now. And the fact of the matter is that if the American people saw it the way that Donald Trump did, I don't think we would be having this conversation. I don't think this would even be an issue. He would be popular on the issue of how he's handling immigration, and he's not. A lot of Americans are either themselves immigrants, they have ties to immigrants, they live in mixed status homes. Immigration is something that is actually deeply tied to this country. You said you're Italian. I live in New York. There's a little Italy in New York where people are still celebrating their Italian heritage, still flying Italian flags. They're proud of where they came from. They go back to their home country. They don't forget that that's where they came from.
Still speaking the language.
Again, a question of
my grandparents.
Do the American people believe in this, I think it's called this heritage American idea that some on the MAGA right want to put forward, which is this idea that if you don't tie your American identity back to the Mayflower, you're not really American.
When political leaders describe certain immigrant groups with dehumanizing language while praising immigrants from predominantly white countries, that's not random. Data from the Migration Policy Institute shows African and Caribbean immigrants have some of the highest labor participation and entrepreneurship rates in the country. Somali Americans, for example, have built thriving business corridors in cities like Minneapolis, contributing millions in local tax revenue. That reality doesn't square with caricatures meant to score political points. The assimilation argument also ignores how American identity has always evolved. Irish, Italian, and Jewish immigrants were once labeled undesirable, yet today their cultural traditions are mainstream. The US Census Bureau consistently shows that second-generation immigrants overwhelmingly speak English fluently while still maintaining cultural ties. That balance, economic participation plus cultural heritage, isn't a threat. It's historically normal. Framing assimilation as cultural erasure misunderstands how integration has actually worked for over a century. There's also a deeper historical irony. The pressure to fully assimilate has often been enforced violently, particularly against Native Americans and Black Americans. Federal boarding school policies in the 19th and 20th centuries explicitly sought to strip Native children of language and identity. Jim Crow laws criminalized Black self-determination. That context matters when discussing whether forced conformity is truly an American value. And politically, the idea that harsh rhetoric reflects a majority vision of America doesn't hold up. Polling from Pew Research regularly finds that most Americans support pathways to legal status and reject race-based immigration preferences. The country has always functioned more like a quilt than a single fabric, different histories stitched together moving forward.
Look, the left wants to make this binary, and that's what I'm hearing here. Either you're a racist or you're for open borders. And that is not the real world, and that is not Donald Trump. He spoke favorably, as Brad noted, for hardworking people who love this country to come to this country. That's who we want to come to this country. That's who Donald Trump wants to come to this country. And it was always true, and to your point, Abby, it's playing out, that the idea of enforcing immigration law is easier to support than when cameras are following around the actual enforcement of immigration law. And because we're all human beings, and these are human beings, they may be on the wrong side of the law.
But it's also common sense,
but you still have, let me just finish this one point. Yeah. We have this, we all have, I hope, a heart for other people. But there is also, we long ago crossed this line with millions and millions and millions of people being allowed in illegally and being given various statuses, many of them. And so how do you solve that problem? Well, you solve that problem by returning them home. And that's never going to work.
I don't know that Americans agree that you solve that problem by treating visa overstays the same way you treat somebody who murdered someone on the streets,
they are
right?
Treated
because,
the same.
well, in this administration, they are. And that's part of the problem. Because let me give you another example, and I'll let you respond to it. Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, his grandfather came over to this country illegally and was ordered to be deported, did not leave, and was granted asylum in one of the waves of asylum in this country. And now here he is, and Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State. I think Americans understand that, in theory, like to your point, they approve of dealing with the immigration system. They think it's broken. But when you ask them, should you deport somebody who's been here for 20 years? Should you deport somebody who's working hard, hasn't broken any laws? They say no.
Because they understand that there's a cartoon version of immigration, which is being peddled by Donald Trump and the Republican Party. This notion that we'll take people who want to work hard, we'll take people who want to have decent lives. The vast, vast majority of immigrants, legal and illegal, are those people. Yes. And they always have been. And this notion that only heritage Americans have this culture, the fundamental truth about the American people. Well, or that
some people are saying.
Some people are saying this.
Some people
in the Republican Party that you have to be able to trace your roots back to whatever, the Mayflower, or to some, culture of the 17th century in
this
Europe.
idea of Western culture.
That is just, most Americans are normal. They don't have grand theories of everything. They don't have apocalyptic mythos where we are in cultural
most
conflict
Americans
with the
didn't watch
devil.
the
They're
State of the
normal
Union.
But
people.
can I ask you a question, though?
When it drifts into this idea that you're only truly American if your roots go back to the Mayflower, it ignores how immigration has actually shaped the country. More than 40 million immigrants live in the US today, according to census data, and nearly 1 in 4 children has at least one immigrant parent. That's not some fringe reality, that's modern America. The economy reflects that too. Immigrants are disproportionately represented among small business owners and STEM workers, contributing billions in tax revenue each year. There's also the legal complexity that gets flattened in political arguments. Roughly 40% of undocumented immigrants are visa overstays, not border crossers. Treating someone who missed paperwork deadlines the same as a violent offender doesn't reflect how the system has historically worked. Even high-profile figures like Marco Rubio have family histories shaped by messy immigration processes. That nuance is part of the American story, not an exception to it. On enforcement, polling from Pew Research consistently shows that while Americans support border security, majorities also favor pathways to legal status for long-term residents who work and pay taxes. The public response shifts when enforcement is applied to families attending routine check-ins or people with no criminal record. It's one thing to back law and order in theory, it's another to see it play out on real communities. And historically, the notion of a single heritage defining national identity has never held up. Waves of Irish, Italian, Jewish, and Asian immigrants were once branded as incompatible with Western culture. Today, their traditions are woven into everyday American life. That evolution isn't weakness, it's how the country has always renewed itself.
If you did, because when we said that people who are like going to their appointments for their immigration status, they are getting detained and deported. That is happening. There is video of that happening. You said no. But if you found out that they were, would you have a problem with that? Do you think that is how it should be working?
If you're suggesting that people who are here legally are being picked up as if they're here illegally, then yeah, I would want that fixed.
I want to answer your question very directly. There are people who are coming to their appointments who are working within the system. They have overstayed their visa. They are technically deportable. They've been adjudged deportable, and they're being detained. That is happening. I don't know how high the error rate is. I think that's a bad policy for this administration. I don't think it is helping them. I think that the president has all the credibility in the world on this issue. He ran on it. The system was broken, and Joe Biden made it worse. And he was elected to fix it. I think he can maintain that confidence by making sure that's not happening, and that he's spending all his effort on people who are violent criminals, people who have entered twice. If you've entered twice, you're a felon, and those people should be deported as well. But they have to do a good job of separating those two.
All right, I think we've come to a good place on that topic. I do want to talk about something else that President Trump spent some time on. He also used his speech to tout his economic accomplishments, but the question is, will it be enough to ease Americans' concerns about affordability? Here's what he had to say.
12 months ago, I had just inherited a nation in crisis with a stagnant economy, inflation at record levels. Gasoline, which reached a peak of over $6 a gallon, is now below $2.30 a gallon in most states. In 12 months, I secured commitments for more than $18 trillion pouring in from all over the globe. The tariffs paid for by foreign countries.
Okay, everyone. They are not paid for by foreign countries.
We're paying for them.
Americans are paying for them. It is interesting, though, that
The gas thing was a lot too, just FYI.
Yeah, that is also true. At least it's a gross.
the inflation thing
It's a
wasn't
gross
the record
overstatement. It's a gross overstatement.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, I'll take
Why
all the
is the
Trump gas
president-
prices
He
over
says
all
in
the
history-
Biden ones.
Why is the president, Terry, doubling down on, especially on tariffs, a deeply unpopular policy that the Supreme Court just said was illegal?
Because he's always believed in it. He has a vision of America with belching smokestacks and factories and trade surpluses that is basically from his teenage years, like 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And that's what he's committed to. The problem is that he did it unlawfully, and he's doing it unlawfully again. These new tariffs, the 15% global tariffs, they're on balance of payments deficits. His own lawyer in the Supreme Court told the Supreme Court, That would be illegal if we were using Section 122. John Sauer said that to the Supreme Court, and Trump has now done it again. So it's just a matter of time before these are illegal, and they are paid for by the American people. As Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent himself let the cat out of the bag the other day when somebody asked him about how would a refund of all these, he says, the American people aren't going to see that money. Admitting.
What stood is how much the immigration debate gets framed in extremes, when the reality is far more layered. According to the Department of Homeland Security, a significant share of undocumented immigrants are visa overstays, people who entered legally and simply fell out of status. That's a paperwork and backlog problem as much as it is a border issue. When individuals show up to scheduled check-ins and are detained, it raises legitimate questions about whether the system is encouraging compliance or discouraging it. There's also the practical side. The U.S. Immigration Court backlog has ballooned to over 2 million cases in recent years. That means people can wait years for hearings, working, paying taxes, and raising families in the meantime. Mass detention without clear prioritization strains resources and diverts attention from individuals with serious criminal records. Even conservative-leaning analysts have acknowledged that targeted enforcement is more cost-effective than sweeping operations that blur distinctions between violent offenders and long-term residents. On the economic front, the tariff claims deserve scrutiny. Multiple studies, including research from the Federal Reserve, have shown that tariffs imposed in recent years were largely paid by American importers and consumers through higher prices. The Tax Foundation estimated billions in added annual cost to U.S. households. That directly impacts affordability, especially when inflation remains a top voter concern. Most Americans, according to Pew Research polling, support stronger border management but also favor legal pathways for long-term, law-abiding immigrants. They don't see it as a binary choice between chaos and cruelty. They want order, yes, but also fairness and economic realism. That middle ground often gets drowned out in political theater, even though it reflects where much of the country actually stands. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.